Sophia answered her grandmother's call in Hungarian without thinking, her voice carrying the accent of a village she'd never seen across a dimly lit restaurant. The billionaire at table 7 went rigid, his hand clamping down on his bodyguard's wrist with enough force to bruise, and whispered 4 words that would unravel 60 years of silence. "I know that, family." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Some moments change everything. Not the grand gestures or carefully planned turning points, but the small, unrehearsed seconds that crack open a door you never knew existed. For Viktor Kovacs, a man whose name was whispered in fear across 3 continents, that moment came in the form of a phone conversation he was never meant to overhear. For Sofia Dalka, a 26-year-old waitress balancing plates and secrets in equal measure, it was the split-second decision to answer her grandmother's call in the language of her blood. She thought she was just being polite. He thought he was just having dinner. But when those perfectly pronounced Hungarian vowels floated across the dimly lit restaurant, they didn't just catch his attention, they detonated a memory he'd spent 30 years trying to bury. This isn't a story about coincidence. This is a story about bloodlines and betrayal, about the ghosts that follow families across oceans, and about how a single phrase in a mother tongue can unravel a carefully constructed empire of silence. The restaurant was called Luminance, one of those establishments where the lighting was kept deliberately low to make everyone look either mysterious or expensive, depending on their tax bracket. It sat in the heart of the financial district, a temple to overpriced steaks and underpoured wine, where deals worth millions were sealed with a handshake and a dessert menu. At 8:30 on a Thursday evening, the dining room hummed with the particular energy of wealth, the soft clink of crystal, the murmur of conversations that never quite rose above a calculated whisper, and the occasional burst of laughter from tables where powerful men convinced themselves they were having fun. Sofia Dalka moved through this world like a dancer navigating a stage she'd memorized but never truly belonged on. She'd been working at Luminance for 18 months. Long enough to know which patrons tipped well and which ones treated servers like furniture. She knew how to smile with her eyes, how to anticipate needs before they were voiced, and most importantly, how to be invisible when invisibility was required. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that made her look older than her years, and her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black trousers, fit her like it was designed to erase personality. She was good at her job, more than good. She needed to be. The tips from Luminance paid for her grandmother's medication, the kind that wasn't covered by insurance and cost more per month than most people paid in rent. They paid for the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates in a neighborhood where the subway rattled the windows at 3 in the morning. They paid for the online courses she took late at night, the ones that might one day lead to something more than carrying plates. But tonight, like every night, she wasn't thinking about the future. She was thinking about getting through her shift without dropping anything or accidentally meeting the wrong person's eyes for too long. Table 7 was different. It had been different from the moment they walked in. The reservation had been made under a simple name, M.R. Kovacs. Party of 3, but when the host had escorted them to the corner booth, a ripple of awareness had moved through the restaurant like a cold wind. The man at the center of that ripple was in his late 50s, with steel gray hair combed back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't carved from something harder than flesh. His suit was charcoal, impeccably tailored, the kind that didn't whisper wealth but stated it as an irrefutable fact. His eyes, a startling pale blue that seemed to see through everything they touched, surveyed the room with the calm assessment of a predator who knew he was at the top of the food chain. Viktor Kovacs. Sophia hadn't known the name when she first saw him, but Maria, the hostess, had grabbed her arm on the way to the kitchen and hissed the information like a warning. Real estate developer, Maria had said, though the way she said it made it clear that real estate was a polite fiction. The rumors varied depending on who was telling them. Import-export business, private security, connections to people you didn't cross unless you had a death wish. Whatever the truth was, it lived in the careful space around him, the way other diners lowered their voices when he passed, the way the manager had personally greeted him at the door. Kovacs wasn't alone. Flanking him on his right was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts of a military installation. His name, according to the reservation, was Andrei, though Sophia suspected that wasn't his real name any more than Mur. Kovacs was just a real estate developer. Andrei was younger, perhaps early 40, with a neck that seemed to merge directly into his shoulders and hands that rested on the table like blunt instruments waiting to be deployed. He wore a black shirt that strained against his frame, and his eyes, dark and flat, never stopped moving, cataloging exits, assessing threats, watching everyone who came within 10 feet of their table. The third man was older, mid-60s, with thinning hair and a nervous energy that manifested in the way he kept adjusting his tie. Sophia had caught his name when Kovacs addressed him. Dmitri. He carried a leather portfolio and had the exhausted look of a man who'd spent his entire life doing other people's dirty work and was too invested to stop now. Sophia had taken their order with her usual professional efficiency. Kovacs had ordered in English, his accent thick but his words precise, and she'd noted the way Andrei Andre's eyes tracked her movements with the intensity of someone trained to notice everything. She'd brought them drinks, an aged whiskey for Kovacs, vodka for Andre, and a glass of wine for Dmitri that he barely touched. The meal had proceeded without incident. They spoke in low tones, occasionally in English, but more often in a language she recognized but pretended not to understand. Russian. She'd heard enough of it working in the district to know the cadence, the hard consonants. It was 9:15 when her phone vibrated in her pocket. Luminance had a strict policy about personal phones during shifts, but her grandmother's health had been declining rapidly over the past month, and Sophia had cleared it with the manager that she could keep her phone on silent in case of emergencies. When she felt the insistent buzz against her hip, her heart seized with familiar dread. She glanced at the screen. Najimama, grandmother, calling from the care facility. Sophia's section was momentarily clear. Her tables were either eating or waiting for courses being prepared in the kitchen. She made a quick decision and stepped into the small alcove near the kitchen entrance, a space partially shielded from the dining room by a decorative screen. She answered the call, keeping her voice low. The words came automatically in the language she'd spoken first, before English had layered itself over her tongue. Najamama Minden Ren Bin Van? Grandmother, is everything okay? Her grandmother's voice, thin and reedy but blessedly lucid, came through the speaker. She was worried, confused about where she was again, asking when Sophia would visit. Sophia felt the familiar ache in her chest, the weight of obligations she could barely carry. She responded in Hungarian, the language of her childhood, of her mother's lullabies, of the bedtime stories about a homeland she'd never seen. She didn't notice Viktor Kovacs stiffen in his seat 15 feet away. She didn't see the way his hand, reaching for his whiskey glass, froze midair. She didn't see Andre's eyes snap toward the alcove with sudden, sharp focus. She was too absorbed in soothing her grandmother, promising a visit this weekend, assuring her that everything was fine, that she was safe, that Sophia loved her. The Hungarian flowed from her lips with a fluency and a specific regional accent that she'd inherited, like her dark eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin. Niagoji, Najima Mama, Aktivi, Gian Maglatagalik, Igram. Don't worry, grandmother, I'll visit you this weekend, I promise. It was the vowels that did it. The particular way she shaped the word HTVG in the musical lilt on Maglatagalake. It wasn't the Hungarian of Budapest, polished and urban. It was the Hungarian of the northeast, of small villages clustered in the Carpathian foothills, where dialects carried the weight of centuries and family names were etched into church walls that had stood since the Ottoman Empire. Viktor Kovacs heard it, and in that instant he wasn't sitting in an overpriced restaurant in a gleaming American city. He was 14 years old, standing in a kitchen with a dirt floor, listening to his Aunt Esther speak in exactly that accent as she stirred a pot of stew and sang old songs about rivers and mountains. He was 17, hiding in a barn while men with guns shouted in the courtyard, and his cousin Mira whispered prayers in that same melodic Hungarian. He was 23, standing at a grave in the rain, listening to a priest intone blessings in the language of the dead. His hand shot out and gripped Andre's wrist with sudden, crushing force. Andre, trained to react to threats, to violence, to danger, went absolutely still. He knew that grip. It wasn't aggression. It was shock. Kovacs' face had drained of color, his pale blue eyes wide and fixed on the alcove where the waitress stood, her back partially to them, speaking into her phone. That accent, Kovacs whispered, his voice hoarse and urgent in Russian. I know that family. Andre's expression didn't change, but his body language shifted subtly, coiling with readiness. Sir? Kovacs released his wrist, but his hand trembled slightly as he set it flat on the table. He was a man who didn't tremble. Ever. Dmitri, sensing the shift in atmosphere, looked up from his untouched wine, his nervous eyes darting between Kovacs and Andre. The waitress, Kovacs said, still in Russian, his eyes never leaving Sophia's figure. The one who's been serving us. Listen to her. Andre tilted his head slightly, his sharp hearing focusing on the alcove. He caught the tail end of Sophia's conversation, the gentle reassurances, the promise to visit. Hungarian. He didn't speak it fluently, but he recognized it. More importantly, he recognized the effect it was having on Kovacs. Sophia ended the call, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned, intending to check on her tables. That's when she saw him. Viktor Kovacs was staring at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. It wasn't the look she sometimes got from drunk patrons or entitled businessmen. It was something else entirely. It was recognition, and beneath that, something that looked dangerously like grief. She forced herself to maintain her composure, her professional mask, and walked toward their table. Is everything satisfactory, gentlemen? Can I get you anything else? Her English was flawless, unaccented, deliberately neutral. Kovacs didn't respond immediately. He was studying her face now, cataloging every feature with the focus of a man searching for a specific piece of a puzzle. Sophia felt exposed, pinned under that gaze like a butterfly on a board. Your name, Kovacs said finally, his voice low and rough. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Sophia's heart rate kicked up, but she kept her smile in place. Sophia, sir? Is there something wrong with your meal? Sophia, he repeated as if tasting the word. Sophia what? This was wrong. Patrons didn't ask servers for their last names. Her instinct screamed at her to deflect, to lie, to get away from this table, and whatever storm was brewing behind those pale blue eyes. But something in his expression stopped her. It wasn't threat, though threat was there. It was desperation. Dalka, she said quietly. Sophia Dalka. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kovacs inhaled sharply, his hand gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Andrei's hand moved subtly toward his jacket, where Sophia suddenly knew with absolute certainty a weapon was concealed. Dmitri looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Dalka Kovacs breathed, and the words sounded like a curse and a prayer combined. "And your grandmother, the one you were speaking to, what is her name?" Every alarm in Sophia's head was screaming now. This was dangerous. Whatever was happening, it was pulling her into something she didn't understand and couldn't control. But she couldn't look away from his eyes, and she couldn't stop herself from answering. "Magda," she whispered. Magdalena Dampiet. Victor Kovacs closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears if men like him were capable of crying. "Magdalena from Felsbanya," he said, not asking, stating. "Daughter of Istvan and Rosa, sister to Esther, Myra, and Catalin." The world tilted. Sophia's grandmother had 3 sisters. Had. Past tense. They'd died decades ago, long before Sophia was born, in circumstances her grandmother would never discuss. The only thing Sophia knew was that her grandmother had left Hungary as a young woman, alone, and never returned. And this man, this dangerous stranger in an expensive suit, had just recited her grandmother's family tree like he was reading from a book of the dead. "How do you know that?" Sophia's voice was barely audible, her professional composure shattered. Kovacs reached into his jacket and Andrei visibly tensed, ready to act, but what Kovacs pulled out wasn't a weapon, it was a wallet. From it he extracted a small, faded photograph, its edges worn soft from years of handling. He placed it on the table and turned it toward her. The photograph showed 5 children standing in front of a simple wooden house. 3 girls and 2 boys. The girls wore simple dresses, their hair in braids. The boys wore shorts and serious expression. They were all young, maybe ranging from 6 to 14. On the back, in faded ink, were names: Esther, Mira, Catalin, Magda, and Victor. Sophia stared at the photograph, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Her grandmother, young and smiling, standing next to 3 sisters she'd lost, and a boy who had grown into the man sitting in front of her. "Your grandmother," Victor Kovacs said, his voice thick with emotion he was barely containing, "is my cousin. And 30 years ago, her sisters, my aunts, died because of a choice I made. A choice that has haunted me every day since. I thought Magda was dead too. I thought I was the last one left." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sophia saw the weight of decades in that gaze. "I need to see her," he said. "Please, I need to know she's alive. I need to ask her forgiveness for what I did to our family." The restaurant continued around them, oblivious. Somewhere, a cork popped. Somewhere, someone laughed. But at table 7, time had stopped. Sophia Dalka stood frozen, holding the photograph of ghosts, while a man she'd served a whiskey to an hour ago unraveled a history she'd never known existed. And deep in her bones, in the part of her that still dreamed in Hungarian, she knew that answering that phone call had just changed the course of her entire life. Sophia's hands were shaking. She realized this only when she noticed the photograph trembling in her grip, the faces of the dead children wavering like they were underwater. She should walk away. She should excuse herself, retreat to the kitchen, tell the manager that table 7 was making her uncomfortable, and let someone else handle whatever this was. But her feet wouldn't move. They were rooted to the expensive carpet like she'd grown there, like the restaurant had been built around her in this moment. Victor Kovacs watched her with the patience of a man who'd spent decades waiting for something he'd convinced himself would never come. Andrei remained coiled and ready, his dark eyes tracking every micro-expression on Sophia's face, every shift in her posture. Dmitri had set down his wineglass and was staring at the table, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. The usual background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade, or perhaps Sophia's brain had simply stopped processing anything that wasn't directly in front of her. "I don't understand," she finally managed, her voice coming out higher and thinner than she'd intended. "My grandmother never mentioned you. Never. Not once." It felt like a betrayal to say it, like she was revealing a family secret to a stranger. But he wasn't a stranger, was he? He was family, allegedly. The word tasted strange even in her thoughts. Victor's expression flickered with something that might have been pain or might have been understanding. "No," he said quietly. She wouldn't have. What reason would she have to speak of the dead? That's what she thought I was. What she had every right to think I was. He gestured to the empty seat across from him, a chair that had been waiting like a trap. "Please, sit. I'll explain what I can, Dot." Single quotes, every instinct told Sophia this was a mistake. You didn't sit down with men like Victor Kovacs. You didn't let them into your life. You didn't believe their stories or trust their intentions, no matter what photographs they carried or what family trees they could recite. But her grandmother's face, young and smiling in that faded image, anchored her. If there was even a chance this was real, even a chance that Magdalka's past could be illuminated after 70 years of deliberate darkness, didn't Sophia owe it to her to listen? She sat. The chair felt too soft, too expensive, like it was designed for people who made different kinds of decisions than she did. "I can give you 10 minutes, she said, trying to reclaim some control over the situation. "Then I have to get back to work." It was a lie. Her section was still quiet, but she needed the boundary, the exit. Victor nodded, accepting the term. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, and Sophia had the distinct impression he was using the moment to organize his thoughts, to decide which version of the truth to tell. "Felsbanya," he began, "was a small village in northeastern Hungary, near the Romanian border. After the war, after the Soviets came, it was a place that time forgot. Not strategic enough to matter, not wealthy enough to plunder. Just a collection of families who'd been farming the same land for generations, trying to survive under a government that saw them as expendable. Sophia knew this much. Her grandmother had spoken occasionally of the village, always in tones of wistful sadness, describing the mountains and the river and the small church with the crooked steeple. But she'd never explained why she'd left or why she'd never returned. Our family, the Dalka family, Victor continued, and hearing him claim that name sent a strange jolt through Sophia's chest, was one of the larger ones in the village. Your great-grandparents, Istvan and Rosa, had 5 children, 4 daughters, and then finally a son. Me. He said it without pride or shame, simply as a fact. In that time, in that place, a son meant the family line would continue. It meant the land would stay in the family name. It mattered. Andre shifted slightly, his eyes flicking to the entrance where a new party of diners had arrived. The manager was seating them at a table near the windows. Normal life continued oblivious. I was the youngest, Victor said, and I was spoiled. Not with money, we had none, but with attention, with expectations. My sisters raised me as much as my parents did. Esther taught me to read. Mira taught me to play the violin badly. Katalin taught me how to fight, how to stand up for myself. And Magda, his voice softened on her name, Magda was the one who believed I could be more than a farmer in a forgotten village. She was the smartest of all of us. She should have been the one to go to university, to see the world. But she was a woman in 1950s Hungary. That meant her intelligence was a decoration, not a tool. Sophia thought of her grandmother, the woman who'd helped her with algebra homework when Sophia was 12, who'd taught herself English from library books, who'd worked 2 jobs to help put Sophia's mother through nursing school. That fierce intelligence had been there all along, quietly burning. When I was 17, Victor continued, his knuckles white around his glass, I got involved with the wrong people. There was a resistance movement, young men who thought they could fight back against the Soviets, who believed in a free Hungary. It was naive, it was doomed, but I was 17 and full of righteousness and stupidity. He paused, and the silence stretched like a wound. They came in the night, the secret police. Not for me. I was at a meeting in the next village. They came for my family to send a message, to make an example. The restaurant's warmth suddenly felt oppressive. Sophia's throat was dry, but she couldn't move to take a sip of the water glass in front of her. They took my father and my mother, Victor said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They took Esther. They took Mira. They took Katalin, and they burned our house to the ground. The words fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of horror through Sophia's understanding. Magda was the only one who escaped. She'd been visiting a friend in the next village, spending the night. When she came back the next morning, there was nothing left but ashes and questions no one dared to answer. And you? Sophia heard herself ask. Where were you? Victor's smile was bitter, self-lacerating. I was in hiding. The resistance smuggled me out of the country within 72 hours. They told me if I stayed, I'd be tortured until I gave up names, and then I'd be killed. So I ran. I left my cousin, your grandmother, alone with the bodies of her family and the knowledge that her baby cousin, the one she'd protected and nurtured, had survived while everyone else burned. The casual brutality of history, of politics, of systems that ground people into dust, hit Sophia like a physical blow. She'd known intellectually that her grandmother had fled Hungary during the Soviet era, but knowing in abstract and hearing the specific, visceral details were entirely different experience. I thought she was dead, Victor said, and now there were tears in his eyes, though his voice remained steady. For 3 decades, I believed Magda had taken her own life. That's what someone told me years later, a rumor that had circulated in the village before it was finally abandoned entirely. I've carried that guilt, that failure, every single day. I built everything I have, he gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the restaurant but the empire beyond it, on the foundation of surviving when my family didn't. And now you're telling me she's alive? Sophia's mind was reeling. She looked at the photograph again, at her grandmother's young face, at the siblings who'd died, at the boy who'd become this complicated, dangerous man. She never talked about it, Sophia said, her own voice thick with emotion. Never. I knew she'd come to America alone. I knew she'd lost her family in Hungary, but she never told me how. She never told me there was anyone else. She thought I was dead too, Victor said, and it wasn't a question, or she wished I was. Both are understandable. He reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he placed his hand over hers. His skin was warm, dry, and his grip was gentle despite the obvious strength in those fingers. Sofia Dalka, my cousin's granddaughter. Family I never thought I'd see again. He said it like a prayer, like an absolution he didn't deserve but desperately needed. Andre cleared his throat softly, a gentle reminder of time and exposure. They'd been sitting here too long. People were starting to glance over, curious about why the waitress was holding hands with Victor Kovacs, why the dangerous man in the expensive suit looked like he was coming apart at the seams. Sophia pulled her hand back, not unkindly but firmly. She needed space to think, to process, to figure out what this meant. I need to talk to her, she said. My grandmother. Before anything else happens, I need to talk to her. She deserves to know you're alive before I make any decisions about whether you should see her. Victor nodded. Of course. Of course. That's more than fair. I'm staying at the Apex Hotel downtown, room 2804. When you're ready, if you're ready, call me. He pulled a business card from his wallet. Elegant black cardstock with silver lettering. Victor Kovacs, CEO, Kovacs Developments International. A phone number, an email address, the trappings of legitimacy. Sophia took the card, slipping it into her pocket next to her phone. She stood up and her legs were steadier than she'd expected. I have to get back to work, she said, and this time it wasn't an excuse. It was a lifeline, a return to the familiar world where she knew the rules and her role. Sophia, Victor called as she started to turn away. She looked back. Thank you, he said simply, for listening, for not running. Your grandmother raised her daughter well, and her daughter raised you well. I can see that. Single quote. Sophia didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and walked away. Her legs carried her through the dining room, past tables where people ate expensive food and conducted expensive business, past the kitchen where the line cooks shouted and plates clattered, past the manager's office and the storage room, all the way to the staff bathroom where she locked herself in a stall and finally let herself shake apart. She pressed her hands against the cool metal walls and tried to breathe, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Her grandmother had a cousin. Her grandmother's family had been murdered by the secret police. Her grandmother had survived alone and built a life in America from nothing, carrying the weight of that loss in silence for 70 years. And now the boy who'd lived, the boy who'd triggered the massacre, had found his way back through the random chance of a phone call in a restaurant. The universe, Sophia thought, had a cruel sense of timing. She pulled out her phone and looked at Victor's card. The weight of the decision pressing down on her was immense. Did she tell her grandmother? Did she risk reopening wounds that had maybe finally scarred over? Did she protect the old woman from this ghost, or did she give her the chance to face him? Sophia thought of her grandmother's face when she spoke about Hungary. The distant look in her eyes, the way her hands would still sometimes when she thought no one was watching. She thought of the way Magda had insisted Sophia learn Hungarian, had taught her the old songs, had kept that connection alive even when it seemed to cause her pain. And she knew, with the certainty that came from truly knowing someone, that her grandmother would want to know. Whatever demons she'd been running from, she'd want to face them, even if it destroyed her. Sophia dried her eyes, fixed her makeup, and walked back out onto the floor. Table 7 was settling their bill, cash placed discreetly in the leather folder. By the time she returned to collect it, they were already standing to leave. Victor caught her eye one last time, a look of desperate hope and ancient grief, and then they were gone, disappearing into the city night. The tip he'd left was $500. Sophia didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the apartment she shared with two roommates who worked opposing shifts, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed and rattled around her. The business card sat on her nightstand, catching the orange glow of the street light filtering through her thin curtains. Victor Kovacs, CEO, a man who'd built an empire on the foundation of survival guilt, a man who was, impossibly, her grandmother's cousin, her family. By 5 in the morning, she'd given up on sleep entirely. She made coffee in the cramped kitchen, the ancient percolator gurgling and spitting like it was angry at being awake. Her roommate Jen stumbled out of her bedroom, bleary-eyed and reaching for her scrubs. She was a nursing assistant at the same care facility where Magda lived, which was how Sophia had managed to get her grandmother a spot there. Connections mattered, even small ones. You look like hell, Jen observed, pouring herself coffee. Bad shift? Something like that, Sophia said, which was true enough. Jen didn't push. That was the unspoken rule of roommates who barely knew each other. Everyone had their demons. You didn't poke at them unless invited. At 7:30, Sophia was on the subway heading to Riverside Care, a modest facility on the edge of the borough that smelled perpetually of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. It wasn't the worst place in the city, but it wasn't the best either. The staff was kind but overworked, the rooms were small but clean, and the residents were treated with dignity even when they couldn't remember their own names. It was what Sophia could afford. Barely, and the guilt of that scraped at her constantly. She found her grandmother in the common room, sitting by the window in her wheelchair, a blanket tucked around her lap despite the room being slightly too warm. Magda Dalko was 87 years old, and illness had whittled her down to something delicate and bird-like. But her eyes, when they were lucid, were still sharp. Still the eyes of the woman who'd crossed an ocean with nothing, who'd learned a new language, who'd buried a husband and raised a daughter and refused to be broken by the weight of history. Naji Mama, Sophia said softly, kneeling beside the wheelchair. Magda turned and recognition bloomed immediately across her face. That was a good sign. The dementia came and went like weather, and today seemed to be a clear day. Sophia Edison, Magda said, her voice thin but warm. My sweet, you came early. It's not the weekend yet. Her accent, even after 60-plus years in America, still colored her English with the music of Hungarian. I know. I needed to see you, to talk to you about something important. Sophia took her grandmother's hand, feeling the delicate bones beneath papery skin, the prominent veins. This woman had survived so much. How could Sophia possibly add to her burden? But she had to. The question burned in her chest, demanding release. Magda's expression shifted, sharpening. She'd always been able to read Sophia like a book. Something happened, she said. It wasn't a question. Tell me. Sophia took a breath. There was no gentle way to do this. Last night at the restaurant, a man came in. His name is Victor Kovacs. She watched her grandmother's face carefully, looking for recognition, for fear, for anything. He heard me speaking Hungarian on the phone with you, and he recognized the accent, the dialect. Magda had gone very still, the kind of still that wasn't peace but paralysis. Her grip on Sophia's hand tightened, surprisingly strong. Victor, she repeated, and the name came out like she was testing it, like she was trying to remember how to pronounce a word in a language she'd forgotten. Victor Kovacs Pepe, he says he's your cousin, Sophia continued, her voice gentle but insistent. He showed me a photograph. 5 children standing in front of a house. Esther, Mira, Catalin, Magda, and Victor. She paused, letting that sink in. He told me what happened in Felsbania, the secret police, the fire. A sound escaped Magda's throat, something between a gasp and a sob. Her free hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes, those sharp eyes, went distant with memory and pain. He's alive, she whispered. After all this time, Victor is alive. Sophia didn't know what reaction she'd expected, but this raw grief mixed with wonder, wasn't it? You thought he was dead? I hoped he was dead, Magda said, and the honesty of it was brutal. I prayed he was dead because if he was alive, it meant he'd survived while everyone else burned. It meant he was somewhere in the world, living, breathing, while my mother and father and sisters were ash in the ground. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, cutting tracks through the landscape of her face. But I also prayed he was alive because he was just a boy. A stupid, idealistic boy who believed in things that got people killed. Sophia felt her own throat tight. He wants to see you. He's been carrying the guilt of what happened for 30 years. He thought you were dead too. He wants to ask for your forgiveness. Magda was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the small courtyard where a few early spring flowers were attempting to bloom in the weak sunlight. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier, harder. Tell me what he looks like now, this man who claims to be little Victor. Sophia described him as best she could. The steel gray hair, the pale blue eyes, the expensive suit, the aura of power and danger that clung to him like cologne. The bodyguard who watched everything, the nervous assistant, the way the restaurant had shifted around him like he was the sun and everyone else was in orbit. He became what he needed to become to survive, Magda said quietly. That's what we all did. I became American, became someone new. I buried Magda from Felsbania and became Magda Dalka, who worked in a textile factory and married a good man and never spoke of where she came from. She looked at Sophia, her eyes fierce despite the tears. And Victor became powerful enough that no one could ever come for him again. Can you blame him for that? I don't know, Sophia admitted. Nagi mama, I don't know what to do. I don't know if seeing him would help you or destroy you. That's why I came. This is your choice, not his. Not mine, yours. Magda wiped at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve, a gesture so familiar it made Sophia's heart ache. All these years, she said, I've lived with ghosts. Your mother thought I was sad because I missed Hungary, but it wasn't the country I missed. It was them, my sisters, my parents, the life I should have had. She turned the wheelchair slightly to face Sophia more directly, and her expression was determined now, resolve. If Victor is alive, if he's here, then he's not a ghost anymore. He's real. And I need to see him. I need to look him in the eyes and know if the boy I loved is still somewhere inside the man he became. Are you sure? Sophia asked, needing her to be certain. And once I call him, once this happens, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee him. I've spent 60 years running from the past, Magda said with a bitter smile. Maybe it's time I turned around and faced it. Besides, she added, squeezing Sophia's hand, I won't be alone. You'll be with me, won't you? Of course, Sophia said immediately. Every step, I promise. Then call him, Magda said. Tell him to come. But tell him this. Her voice took on a steely quality that reminded Sophia this woman had survived things that would have shattered most people. Tell him I will see him. I will listen to him, but I make no promises about forgiveness. That's something he'll have to earn, not demand. Sophia nodded and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly as she dialed the number on Victor's business card. It rang twice before his voice, rough and immediate, answered. Sophia, she wants to see you, Sophia said without preamble. My grandmother, she's alive, she's relatively lucid today, and she wants to see you, but she has conditions. Anything, Victor said, and the naked desperation in his voice was almost painful to hear. Whatever she needs, whatever she wants you to understand that seeing you doesn't mean forgiving you. She needs time, she needs respect, and she needs me there with her when you meet. Of course. Yes. All of that. When? Where? Sophia looked at her grandmother, who nodded. Riverside Care. It's a facility on East 142nd Street. Can you come this afternoon? Around 2 o'clock? That's usually her best time of day. I'll be there, Victor said. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for giving me this chance. Sophia ended the call and sat back, the weight of what she'd just said in motion settling over her like a heavy coat. Magda reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture of comfort and connection. You're a good girl, Edison. Your mother raised you right, and I raised her right. We've built something good from the ashes, haven't we? Yes, Sophia said, leaning into her grandmother's touch. We have. And let's see what Victor built from his ashes, Magda said, and we'll know, finally, if the past can ever really be laid to rest, or if it haunts us until we die. The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sophia stayed with her grandmother, helping her get ready, brushing her thin white hair, helping her change into a nicer blouse, one she saved for special occasion. Magda wanted to look dignified, she said. She wanted to face her past standing as tall as her frail body would allow. At 1:45, they positioned Magda's wheelchair in the small private visiting room that Sophia had reserved, a space usually used for family meetings with doctors or social workers. It had a table, a few chairs, a window that looked out onto the courtyard, and most importantly, a door that closed. Privacy for whatever emotional explosion was about to occur. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a knock. Sophia opened the door to find Viktor Kovacs standing in the hallway of a modest care facility, looking exactly as out of place as a lion would in a pet store. He'd dressed down, relatively speaking, in dark slacks and a simple gray sweater, but he still radiated power and money. Andre stood behind him, a silent mountain of vigilance. "Just you," Sophia said, blocking the doorway. "Your bodyguard stays outside." Viktor glanced back at Andre, who looked unhappy but nodded. "I'll be right here, sir. You need me, you call." "I'll be fine," Viktor said, though his voice was less certain than usual. He turned back to Sophia, and she saw fear in his eyes. Real, human fear. How is she?" "She's waiting," Sophia said, stepping aside, "and she's stronger than she looks. Don't underestimate her." Viktor nodded and walked into the room. Sophia closed the door behind him, giving them a moment of visual privacy before she followed. She wouldn't leave her grandmother alone, but she'd give them the dignity of the initial reunion without an audience. Inside the room, Viktor Kovacs stood frozen, staring at the woman in the wheelchair by the window. Magda Dalka stared back, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight despite her age. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They were statues. Monuments to different kinds of survival, separated by 6 feet of cheap linoleum and 60 years of grief. Then Viktor dropped to his knees, emotion so sudden and so complete that Sophia actually gasped. This powerful, dangerous man, this CEO who commanded empires, knelt on the floor of a care facility like a penitent before a saint. "Magda," he said, and his voice broke on her name. "Najabet Yambak Sanatat. Karam, I beg your forgiveness, cousin." And Magda, who'd been stone-faced and strong, crumbled. "Oh, Viktor," she whispered in Hungarian. "You foolish, foolish boy. Stand up. Stand up and let me see what you've become." Viktor rose slowly from his knees, and Sophia could see his legs were unsteady. This man who commanded boardrooms and made grown men nervous was trembling like a child before his elderly cousin. He moved closer to Magda's wheelchair, and when he was near enough, she reached up with one frail hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines time had carved into his features. "You have your father's eyes," Magda said softly in Hungarian, and Sophia understood enough to feel the weight of it. "But your mother's mouth, I can still see them in you, Viktor. I can still see the family we lost." "I'm so sorry," Viktor said, and the words came out ragged, torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "Magda, I'm so sorry. Every day for 30 years I've lived with what I did, what my choices cost you." Magda's hand dropped back to her lap, and her expression hardened slightly. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chair across from her. "We have much to talk about, and I won't crane my neck to look at you while we do it." Viktor sat, pulling the chair closer so they were only a few feet apart. Sophia remained by the door, a silent witness to this reunion that felt both intimate and historically significant. These were the last 2 survivors of a family that had been erased by history, by politics, by the grinding machinery of authoritarian violence. "Tell me how you survived," Magda said, switching to English now, perhaps for Sophia's benefit, perhaps because the past was easier to discuss in a language that wasn't soaked in memory. "Tell me where you went, what you became." Viktor took a breath, organizing his thoughts. The resistance had a network. They smuggled me across the border into Austria within 3 days. I was terrified the entire time. I kept thinking they'd catch me, that I'd end up like ... single quotes. He couldn't finish the sentence. "In Austria, I was placed in a refugee camp. I was 17, alone, and I didn't speak German, but I learned fast. I had to." "And then?" Magda prompted, her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "I lied about my age, got work papers, started working construction. I was strong, I didn't complain, and I worked harder than anyone else because if I stopped moving, I had to think, and thinking meant remembering." His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white. "After 2 years, I had enough money to move to West Germany, better opportunities there. I worked for a construction company, then a development firm. I learned the business from the ground up, literally." Sophia watched her grandmother's face, trying to read her reactions. But Magda had spent a lifetime learning to hide her emotions, to survive by not showing weakness. Her expression remained carefully neutral. "I changed my name," Viktor continued. "Or rather, I kept my first name but took my mother's maiden name, Kovacs. Common enough in Hungarian communities that no one would look too closely, but different enough that if anyone from the old days was looking for Viktor Dalka, they wouldn't find it." He paused, meeting Magda's eyes. "I erased myself. I erased us. I became someone new because the person I was, the person who'd gotten his family killed, deserved to die. But you didn't die," Magda said quietly. "You thrived. You built an empire. I may be old, but I'm not ignorant. I've heard the name Kovacs develop. You're very successful, Viktor." There was no warmth in her tone, no congratulation. It was a simple statement of fact, and underneath it, Sophia heard the unspoken question. "While we suffered, while we struggled, while we scraped by, you became rich. How do you justify that?" Viktor heard it too. "Every building I've built, every deal I've made, every dollar I've earned has been haunted by you, by them, by the knowledge that I was alive to enjoy success while you suffered. I've donated millions to refugee organizations, to victims of political violence, to causes that would have mattered to our family, but it's never enough. It can never be enough. No, Magda agreed. It can't, because charity isn't the same as being there. Money isn't the same as family. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet, sharp and unforgiving. I was 19 years old, Victor. 19, and in one night I lost everything. My parents, my sisters, my home. My entire world burned to ash, and I had nothing. No one. I thought you were dead too, and I didn't know if that made it better or worse. Sophia saw tears streaming down Victor's face now, and he made no effort to wipe them away. What did you do? He asked. How did you survive? Magda's gaze went distant, looking not at the room but at the past. I went to Budapest. It took me 3 days to walk there. I slept in barns and ditches. I ate whatever I could steal or beg. When I got to the city, I found other refugees, other people who'd lost everything. We helped each other survive. I got work in a factory. Terrible work. Dangerous work, but it kept me alive. She paused, her breathing slightly labored. Sophia moved closer, ready to intervene if this became too much, but Magda waved her off. I'm fine. Let me finish. She turned back to Victor. I met a man there. LSGL. He was older. A widower. He offered me safety, marriage, legitimacy. I didn't love him. Not then, but I was practical. I said yes. We married, and for a few years I thought maybe I could build a new life in Hungary. Maybe I could survive. But you left, Victor said. You came to America. The Soviets never let up, Magda continued. The fear never went away. Every knock on the door could be them. Every stranger could be an informant. In LSGL, he was involved in things. Small acts of defiance. Underground newspapers. Nothing like your resistance movement, but enough to be dangerous. In 1963, we got word that they were coming for him. We had 24 hours. We ran. She described it clinically, without emotion, but Sophia could hear the trauma underneath. The years of looking over your shoulder. The paranoia that came from living in a society where trust could get you killed. We made it to Austria, then to a refugee camp, and eventually to America. We came through Ellis Island in 1964. I was 31 years old and starting over again. Third time in my life I'd lost everything and had to rebuild from nothing. Did LSGL make it? Victor asked gently. Your husband? He did, Magda said with a small, sad smile. He became Larry. We became American. We worked in garment factories in New York. We saved every penny. Eventually, we had enough to open a small tailor shop. We weren't rich, but we were safe. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. She looked at Victor with fierce eyes. And then Larry died of a heart attack when he was 58. My daughter, your cousin once removed, was only 12, and I was alone again. The weight of it, the accumulated trauma of a lifetime of loss pressed down on the room like a physical presence. Sophia felt it in her chest, the understanding of where she'd come from, the strength that ran in her blood. Her grandmother had survived hell multiple times and kept going, kept building, kept fighting. I raised my daughter alone, Magda continued. I worked 2 jobs. I made sure she went to college, became a nurse, married a good man. She gave me Sophia. Her voice softened on her granddaughter's name. And Sophia's everything I fought for. Everything I survived for. She's the future, Victor. She's the proof that we didn't let them win. Victor looked at Sophia, then really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Recognition of something bigger than either of them. She's strong, he said. I could see it immediately. She has the Dalka strength. She has more than that, Magda said with pride. She has hope. She has opportunities I never had. She has a future that isn't defined by running or hiding or surviving, and that's what I wanted. It's what I fought for. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of decades settling between them. Finally, Victor spoke again, his voice raw. I never married, never had children. I told myself it was because I was too focused on work, on building the company. But the truth is, I didn't think I deserved it. I didn't think I deserved happiness or family or legacy. I thought I deserved to be alone. Maybe you did, Magda said bluntly. Maybe you do. I haven't decided yet. She leaned forward slightly, fixing him with that sharp gaze. But you're here now. You found me, or Sophia found you, or fate put us in the same restaurant at the same time. Whatever it was, we're here. So now what, Victor? What do you want from me? It was the question that mattered, the one Sophia had been wondering since last night. What did Victor Kovacs actually want? Forgiveness? Absolution? Connection? Or something else entirely? Victor took a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice was steady and clear. Want to know you, he said simply. However much time you have left, however much you're willing to give me, I want to know the woman you became. I want to hear your stories. I want to be family again, even if I don't deserve it. And he glanced at Sophia. I want to know my cousin's granddaughter. I want to be part of this family you built, if you'll let me. Magda studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Sophia held her breath, waiting for the verdict. Her grandmother had every right to send Victor away, to refuse him, to let him carry his guilt to his grave. No one would blame her. I'm old, Magda finally said. I'm sick. The doctors tell me I have maybe a year, maybe less. My mind comes and goes. Some days I don't remember my own name. She paused, letting that sink in. But today I remember everything. I remember Esther braiding my hair. I remember Mira singing while she cooked. I remember Katalin teaching me how to throw a punch so the boys would leave me alone. I remember my mother's laugh and my father's hands, calloused and gentle at the same time. And I remember you, little Victor, following us around like a puppy, believing in impossible things. She reached out her hand, and after a moment, Victor took it. You cost me everything. Your noble, stupid fight. It cost me everything. And I've hated you for it. For 30 years, I've hated the ghost of you. I know, Victor whispered. I know. And I'm so sorry, but Magda continued, squeezing his hand. You were 17. You were a child who believed in justice. And the people who killed our family, they were the monsters. Not you. You were just the excuse they used. A tear rolled down her weathered cheek. That's 60 years to think about this. To rage about it, to grieve it, and I'm tired, Victor. I'm so tired of carrying this anger. So if you want to be family again, if you want these last months I have left, then yes, you can have them. But understand this, you don't get to assuage your guilt. You don't get to feel better about yourself. You get to sit with me in my pain, in our shared history, and you get to remember with me. That's all I can offer. That's more than I deserve, Victor said, and he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to their clasped hands. Thank you, Magda. Thank you. Sophia watched this reunion, this forgiveness that wasn't quite forgiveness, and felt something shift in her understanding of her family, of her history, of herself. They were survivors, all of them, shaped by tragedy but not defined by it. And now, against all odds, they were together again. The weeks that followed the reunion transformed Sophia's life in ways she couldn't have predicted. Victor became a constant presence. Not intrusive, but steady, like a tide that kept returning. He visited Magda 3 times a week, always in the afternoon when her mind was clearest. Always bringing small gifts, Hungarian pastries from a bakery in Queens that specialized in old world recipes, books of poetry in Hungarian, a vintage record player, and albums of folk songs from the 1950s that made Magda's eyes go distant with memory. Sophia was there for most of these visits, partly because her grandmother wanted her there, partly because she didn't quite trust Victor yet despite his apparent sincerity. She'd watch them talk for hours, switching between English and Hungarian, filling in the gaps of 6 decades. Victor told stories about building his company, about the early days when he'd worked 18-hour days and slept in his office. Magda shared memories of raising her daughter alone, the small victories and the constant fear that somehow, even in America, the past would find her. But Sophia noticed details that didn't quite add up. The way Andre was always waiting outside, silent and vigilant. The way Victor's phone would ring during visits and he'd glance at the screen, his expression hardening before he silenced it. The way he was always impeccably dressed, even casually, in clothes that cost more than Sophia made in a month. And most tellingly, the way certain topics made him redirect the conversation. What exactly his company did, who his business associates were, why he needed a bodyguard for a simple visit to a care facility. One evening, after a particularly long visit, Sophia walked Victor out to the parking lot. His car was waiting, a black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows, Andre already in the driver's seat. Victor paused before getting in, turning to face her. You have questions, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Sophia decided honesty was the only approach. I do. A lot of them, actually, about who you really are, what you really do. Because real estate developers don't usually travel with armed bodyguards. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or acknowledgement of her perceptiveness. You're right to be cautious, he said. You're protecting your grandmother. That's admirable. That's not an answer, Sophia pressed. The people at the restaurant, they were afraid of you. The manager practically bowed, and I've looked up Kovac's developments. On paper, it's legitimate, but there are gaps. Properties acquired under unusual circumstances. Business partners with interesting backgrounds. So I'll ask you directly. Are you a criminal? The bluntness of the question hung in the cool evening air between them. Most people would have deflected, gotten angry, or laughed it off. Victor did none of those things. Instead, he leaned against the car and met her eyes with that disconcerting directness. The world isn't divided into criminals and law-abiding citizens as neatly as you might think, he said. I've built a legitimate business, developed properties, I employ hundreds of people. I pay taxes, but I also operate in a world where power matters more than paperwork, where the official channels don't always work, and where the people who can make things happen aren't always the people you'd invite to dinner. That's still not an answer, Sophia said, refusing to back down. Victor smiled slightly, a genuine expression that made him look younger. No, it's not. But it's the truth. Am I a mafia boss, as some whisper? No. Do I do business with people who operate outside the traditional boundary? Yes. Have I made choices that would be considered morally gray? Absolutely. But I've never hurt anyone innocent. I've never ordered violence for violence's sake. And everything I've built to ensure that I would never be powerless again. It was the most honest answer she'd gotten. Paradoxically, it made her trust him slightly more. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. And my grandmother? Sophia asked. Is she safe knowing you? Being connected to you? Safer than she's ever been, Victor said with absolute certainty. Anyone who would consider targeting her would have to go through me. And I promise you, Sophia, that is not something anyone would be foolish enough to attempt. There was no bravado in his voice, just cold fact. Sophia believed him. Okay, she said, but if anything changes, if her being part of your life puts her in any danger, I need to know immediately. You have my word, Victor said. And despite what you may think of me, my word actually means something. He got into the car, and Sophia watched it pull away, disappearing into the evening traffic. She stood there for a long moment, wondering if she'd made the right choice allowing this connection to continue. But then she thought of her grandmother's face during the visits, the way Magda came alive when talking to Victor, the way 60 years of loneliness seemed to lift slightly from her shoulders. Whatever Victor was, Whatever he'd done, he gave Magda something Sophia couldn't. Connection to a past that had shaped her, a family member who understood the weight of their shared history. The dynamic between Sophia and Victor evolved from wary tolerance to something approaching friendship. He started including her in conversations, asking about her life, her dreams, her frustrations with barely scraping by despite working herself to exhaustion. One afternoon, after a particularly good visit where Magda had been lucid and cheerful, Victor asked Sophia to join him for coffee at a cafe near the care facility. They sat at a small outdoor table watching the neighborhood move around them. People hurried past with groceries and children, absorbed in the small dramas of ordinary life. It was such a contrast to the intensity of the conversations inside Riverside Care, where history and trauma lived in every word. "Your grandmother told me you're taking online courses," Victor said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "Business administration?" Sophia nodded, slightly surprised Magda had mentioned it. "I want to run my own restaurant someday. Nothing fancy, just a place that serves good food at reasonable prices. Somewhere people feel welcome," she laughed self-deprecatingly. "It's probably a pipe dream. Restaurants fail all the time and I don't have capital or connections." "You have something better," Victor said. "You have drive, and you have standards. Those matter more than money in the long run." He paused, seeming to consider his words. "I'd like to help you." "Not charity," he added quickly, seeing her instinctive resistance. "Consider it a family investment. You're my cousin's granddaughter. We take care of our own." Sophia wanted to refuse immediately. Taking money from Victor felt dangerous, like stepping onto a path she couldn't see the end of. But the practical part of her, the part that was exhausted from working double shifts and calculating whether she could afford both her grandmother's medication and her own rent, hesitated. "I can't accept that," she said finally. "It wouldn't be right. I barely know you." "Then get to know me," Victor said simply. "Come work for me. Not at the restaurant. At my company. I need someone I can trust, someone with intelligence and integrity. You'd start as my personal assistant, but it would be real work, real responsibility, and the pay would be significantly better than what you're making carrying plates." Sophia's first instinct was to refuse, but then she thought about what that money could mean. Better care for her grandmother, fewer worries about bills, the ability to save toward her dream instead of just surviving, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to understand Victor better, to see if he was truly the family man he presented to Magda or something more dangerous underneath. "What would I actually be doing?" she asked cautiously. "Organizing my schedule, managing correspondence, attending meetings with me, learning the business from the inside. I have assistants who handle routine matters, but I need someone close to me who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Someone who questions things." He smiled. "You've proven you can do that." "I'd need to give notice at Luminance," Sophia said, and realized she was actually considering it. 2 weeks minimum. "I won't leave them short-staffed. I wouldn't expect anything less," Victor said. "Take the time you need. When you're ready, call me. The position is yours if you want it." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and Sophia found herself thinking about futures she'd never considered. Working alongside Victor would either be the best decision she'd ever made or a terrible mistake. But lately she'd learned that sometimes the line between those two outcomes was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The transition happened faster than Sophia expected. The manager at Luminance was sorry to lose her, but understanding, especially when she vaguely mentioned a family business opportunity. Her roommates were shocked that she'd be making nearly 3 times her current salary, and Jen joked that she should introduce them to more of Sophia's rich relatives. On her first day at Kovacs Developments International, Sophia arrived at the downtown headquarters, a sleek glass building that seemed to pierce the sky. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with security that rivaled an airport. Victor met her personally, unusual for a CEO, and gave her a tour. The offices were impressive, filled with expensive art and expensive people who moved with the confidence of those who knew they were winning. Her office was adjacent to Victor's, separated by a glass wall and a heavy door that could be closed for privacy. It was larger than her apartment, with a view of the city that made her slightly dizzy. Victor introduced her to the key staff, his CFO, a sharp woman named Elena, who looked at Sophia with barely concealed curiosity, his head of acquisitions, Marcus, who had the smooth charm of a professional negotiator, and of course, Andre, who was apparently head of security as well as Victor's personal protection. "They'll test you," Victor warned as they settled into his office for her first real briefing. "They'll want to know if you're competent or just here because you're family. Show them you're competent." The first week was overwhelming. Sophia learned quickly that Kovacs Developments operated in a world where every decision involved millions of dollars, where deals were made over lunches that cost more than her old weekly salary, and where the line between aggressive business tactics and outright intimidation was frequently blurred. She sat in on meetings where Victor negotiated with city officials, where permits appeared that shouldn't have, where competitors suddenly withdrew their bids for projects Kovacs wanted. She began to understand what Victor had meant about operating in gray areas. Nothing was technically illegal, but everything felt like it skirted very close to lines that shouldn't be crossed. Victor was always polite, always professional, but beneath that civility was an unmistakable threat. "Cross me, and you'll regret it." One evening, as Sophia was organizing files for the next day's meeting, Victor called her into his office. He looked tired, the weight of decades showing in the lines around his eyes. "You're uncomfortable," he observed, "with how we do business." Sophia considered lying, but he'd hired her to be honest. Some of it, yes. The way you operate, it's effective, but it's also intimidating. You use your power to get what you want, and that makes people afraid of you. Yes, Victor agreed. It does. And that fear keeps me safe. It keeps the people I care about safe. It keeps my business running. You think I should operate differently? I think there might be a middle ground, Sophia said carefully, between being a victim and being feared. Victor was quiet for a moment, then smiled sadly. When you grow up watching your family burn because you were powerless to stop it, you learn that the only unforgivable sin is weakness. I built all of this, he gestured at the office, the city beyond, so that I would never be weak again, so that no one could ever hurt me or mine the way I was hurt. Sophia understood, then really understood, the psychology behind Viktor Kovacs. He wasn't evil, he was traumatized, and his entire empire was built on ensuring that the terrified 17-year-old boy who'd lost everything would never exist again. 3 months into her new position, Sophia had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. She spent her mornings coordinating Victor's schedule, her afternoons attending meetings where millions of dollars changed hands with the stroke of a pen, and her evenings visiting her grandmother, often with Victor joining them. Magda's health was declining steadily, but the presence of family seemed to give her moments of clarity and joy that the doctors couldn't explain. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Sophia was in her office reviewing contracts for a new development project when Andre appeared in her doorway. He rarely spoke to her directly, preferring to communicate through Victor, so his presence immediately set off alarm bells. "Miss Dalka," he said, his accent thick, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Kovacs needs you in his office. Now." The urgency in his tone made Sophia's stomach clench. She stood quickly, following Andre through the corridor. Other staff members glanced up as they passed, sensing something was wrong. Andre opened Victor's office door without knocking, and Sophia stepped inside to find Victor standing at his window, his back to the room, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Andre did, then positioned himself in front of it like a sentinel. "Sophia, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and I need you to stay calm." Fear shot through her. "Is it Najee, Mama? Did something happen?" "Your grandmother's fine," Victor said, finally turning to face her. His expression was grave, carved from stone. "But we have a problem, a significant one." He moved to his desk and pulled up something on his computer monitor, turning it so she could see. It was a photograph, grainy and taken from a distance, showing Sophia and Victor having coffee outside Riverside Care. Another photo showed them entering the building together. A third showed them at the company headquarters. "Who took these?" Sophia asked, her mouth dry. "A private investigator named Dmitry Volkov," Victor said. "He works for a man named Alexei Kozlov. Have you heard that name?" Sophia shook her head. Victor's jaw tightened. "Kozlov is a businessman like me. He operates in similar spaces. We've been competitors for years, sometimes partners, usually adversaries. 3 months ago, I outbid him on a development project in Brooklyn, a very lucrative project. He didn't take it well." "What does that have to do with me?" Sophia asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. "Kozlov is a man who believes in leverage," Victor said carefully. "He can't attack me directly. I'm too well protected, too well connected, but he can attack the people I care about. He's been watching me, looking for vulnerabilities, and he found one." He gestured at the photographs. "He found you, and through you, he found Magda." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you saying? That we're in danger because of you?" "I'm saying that Kozlov now knows I have family, real family, people I would do anything to protect, and that makes you valuable to him. Not to hurt, necessarily, but to leverage, to use his pressure to make me give up the Brooklyn project or make other concessions." Sophia felt anger rising, hot and sharp. "You said we'd be safer knowing you. You promised that being connected to you wouldn't put my grandmother in danger, and I meant it," Victor said, his voice hard. "I've already taken steps. Andre has a team watching Riverside Care 24 hours a day. Your apartment building is being monitored. Everywhere you go, you have protection, whether you see it or not. Kozlov won't be able to touch either of you, but he knows about us," Sophia said, her voice rising. "He knows, and that means we're targets. That means my grandmother, who has suffered enough for a lifetime, is now at risk because I answered a goddamn phone call in Hungarian." The guilt and fear in her voice seemed to physically pain Victor. He moved around the desk, approaching her carefully. "I know. And I'm sorry. This is exactly what I spent 30 years trying to prevent, exposing my family to danger because of who I am. But Sophia, you need to understand something. Kozlov is making a mistake. He thinks I'm like him, that I'll negotiate, that I'll back down to protect the people I love. He doesn't understand that I stopped being that person when I was 17 years old." There was something chilling in Victor's tone, a coldness that Sophia had never heard before. This wasn't the man who visited her grandmother with pastries and poetry. This was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to end this threat," Victor said simply. "Permanently. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Sophia thought about her grandmother, frail and vulnerable. She thought about the life she'd built, precarious as it was. She thought about the choice she'd made to let Victor into their lives. and the consequences that choice had spawned. Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, Victor said. You can walk away. Take your grandmother and disappear. I'll provide the resources, new identities, a fresh start somewhere Kozlov will never find. Or you can trust me to handle this my way. But you need to decide now. Running meant losing everything again. It meant her grandmother spending her final months afraid and displaced. It meant abandoning the life Sophia had worked so hard to build. But staying meant trusting a man whose methods she didn't fully understand, whose world she was only beginning to comprehend. What's your way? She asked. Victor exchanged a glance with Andrei. Kozlov respects strength and despises weaknesses. If I negotiate, if I show any hint of backing down, he'll push harder. He'll keep using you as leverage because it works. But if I demonstrate that threatening my family has consequences he's not willing to face, he'll back off. Men like Kozlov are ultimately pragmatic. They know when a fight isn't worth the cost, you're going to threaten him back, Sophia said, understanding dawning. I'm going to make him understand that the cost of continuing this campaign far exceeds any benefit he might gain, Victor corrected. There's a difference. I'm not starting a war. I'm preventing one. Sophia looked at Andrei, who stood impassive and ready, then back at Victor. And if he doesn't back down, if he escalates anyway, then I'll do what I've always done, Victor said. And there was absolute certainty in his voice. I'll protect what's mine, whatever it takes. The weight of the moment pressed down on Sophia. She was standing at a crossroads, forced to choose between flight and fight, between abandoning Victor or trusting him completely. She thought of her grandmother's words after their first reunion. You don't get to assuage your guilt. You get to sit with me in my pain. Maybe trust was the same. You didn't get absolution from your fears. You sat with them and made the choice anyway. Okay, Sophia said. I trust you, but I want to be involved. If this is about protecting my grandmother and me, then I have a right to know what's happening. No more shields. No more protection from the truth. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but understand that once you see this side of my world, you can't unsee it. There are things I do, methods I use, that exist in shadows for a reason. I understand, Sophia said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. Then let me explain how this works, Victor said, moving back to his desk and pulling up a file on his. Kozlov owns a construction company, several restaurants, and has interests in various import-export businesses, some legitimate, some less so. He's protected by connections in city government and law enforcement. He's wealthy, well-defended, and careful. So how do you pressure someone like that? Sophia asked. You find what they value and you make them choose between that and their current course of action, Victor said. He pulled up more files, property deeds, financial records, photographs of buildings. Kozlov has a son, Mikhail, 28 years old, Princeton-educated, being groomed to take over the family business. Kozlov loves him more than anything, sees him as his legacy. Mikhail runs a luxury restaurant in Manhattan, his pet project. It's successful, prestigious, and more importantly, it's clean, legitimate, something Mikhail built on his own merit. Sophia began to see where this was going. You're going to threaten the restaurant. Not threaten, Victor said. I'm going to acquire the building it's housed in. I already own 2 neighboring properties. I'll make Kozlov an offer. Back away from my family, forget you ever saw those photographs, and the restaurant continues operating unmolested. Continue this campaign and I'll evict his son's restaurant. Demolish the building and replace it with something that ensures Mikhail's dream dies. It was ruthless. It was calculated. It was also, Sophia realized, relatively bloodless. No violence, no physical harm, just economic warfare played at the highest level. Will it work? She asked. Kozlov isn't stupid, Victor said. He'll recognize that I'm serious, that I'm willing to hurt what he loves to protect what I love. He'll weigh the Brooklyn project against his son's happiness and future, and he'll back down because ultimately Kozlov is a father first and a businessman second. And if you're wrong, Sophia pressed, if he values winning more than his son's restaurant, Victor's expression darkened, then I'll escalate further. But I don't believe it'll come to that. Kozlov and I have danced this dance before. He knows the rules. He pushed to see if I'd bend. I'm showing him I won't. After this, we'll return to our usual détente. Sophia sat down heavily in the chair across from Victor's desk. The world she'd entered was so much more complex than she'd imagined. Every move was calculated. Every relationship was strategic. Power and leverage were the currency that mattered, and mercy was just another form of weakness to be exploited. How do you live like this? She asked quietly. Always looking over your shoulder. Always preparing for the next threat. I don't know any other way, Victor admitted. This is the life I built to ensure I'd never be powerless again. It's exhausting, it's lonely, but it's mine and no one can take it from me. He paused, his expression softening slightly. But having you and Magda in my life, it's reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Family isn't just about protection and legacy, it's about connection, about being known by people who matter. The acquisition of the building, housing. Mikhail Kozlov's restaurant took 72 hours. Victor moved with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a general. Sophia watched it unfold from her position at his side, witnessing firsthand how power operated in the shadows of legitimacy. The building owner, an elderly man who'd been planning to sell anyway, suddenly had an offer he couldn't refuse. The price was fair, even generous, but the speed was unnatural. Papers were signed, money transferred, and by Friday afternoon, Victor owned the property. The message was delivered that evening, not through lawyers or formal channels, but through the network of connections that men like Victor and Kozlov maintained. A mutual associate, A restaurant supplier who worked with both families carried the news to Alexei Kozlov over dinner. The message was simple and devastatingly clear. I know you've been watching my family. I now own your son's future. Choose wisely. Sophia was in Victor's office when the response came. It was nearly 8 in the evening, the building mostly empty except for security and the few employees who lived at their desks. Victor's private line rang, a number that almost no one had. He glanced at the caller ID and something flickered across his face. Recognition, satisfaction. He answered in Russian, his voice calm and conversational. Sophia couldn't understand most of the words, but she didn't need to. The tone told her everything. This was a negotiation between equals. Two predators acknowledging each other's strength and agreeing to back away from the cliff's edge. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. When Victor hung up, he looked at Sophia and nodded once. It's done. Kozlov has agreed to destroy all surveillance materials and cease any investigation into my personal connections. In exchange, I'll sell the building back to its original owner at cost, ensuring Mikhail's restaurant is protected. We've also agreed to a partnership on a different project in Queens. Something that will benefit both of us. Face saved on both sides. Honor maintained. Sophia felt a complex mixture of relief and discomfort. Just like that? It's over? It's like that, Victor confirmed. Kozlov got his message. He knows the boundaries now. And he knows that I'm willing to defend those boundaries absolutely. That knowledge will keep you and Magda safe far more effectively than any number of bodyguards. But you were ready to destroy an innocent man's business, Sophia said, needing to voice the moral discomfort that had been gnawing at her for 3 days. Mikhail didn't do anything wrong. He was just leveraged. Yes, Victor agreed without hesitation or shame. And if Kozlov hadn't backed down, I would have followed through. That's what makes the threat credible. That's what makes it work. If I'd been bluffing, Kozlov would have known, and we'd be in a much more dangerous situation right now. How do you live with that? Sophia asked, genuinely trying to understand. Knowing you'd hurt innocent people to protect others. Victor was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights sprawling below them. I decided a long time ago who I would protect and who I wouldn't. My family is everything. Everyone else is negotiable. Is it moral? Probably not. But I stopped caring about abstract morality when I watched my family burn. I care about survival, I care about power, and I care about the very few people I've allowed into my life. Everything else is just strategy. It was the most honest he'd ever been with her. And the honesty was more chilling than comfortable lies would have been. Sophia understood then that Victor Kovacs was a man who'd been broken and remade, and the person who'd emerged from that crucible was fundamentally different from the idealistic 17-year-old boy who'd believed in noble causes. That boy had died in the ashes of Felsbany. This man was what had risen in his place. That weekend, Sophia visited her grandmother with Victor, as had become their routine. Magda was having a particularly good day, alert and present, and they spent the afternoon in the facility's small garden where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Victor had brought a photo album, old pictures he'd kept hidden for decades. And they went through it slowly, Magda identifying faces and telling stories. There was a photograph of the 4 sisters together, probably taken a year before the tragedy. They were at a village festival wearing traditional dresses, their arms linked, laughing at something outside the frame. Magda touched the image with a trembling finger, her eyes bright with tears and memory. Esther was going to be married, she said softly. She had a young man, Andres. He was a teacher. They were planning a wedding for the next summer. And Mira, she sang like an angel. People would travel from other villages just to hear her sing in church. She paused, her breath catching. Catalin wanted to be a doctor. Can you imagine? A woman doctor in that time, in that place. But she was so determined, she would have done it too. She was fearless. And you? Victor asked gently. What did you want? I wanted to see the world, Magda said with a sad smile. I wanted to learn languages, to travel, to understand how other people lived. I had a hunger for knowledge that our little village couldn't satisfy. She looked at Sophia. I suppose I got what I wanted in the worst possible way. I saw the world, I learned new languages, but I lost everything else in the process. Not everything, Sophia said, squeezing her grandmother's hand. You built a new family. You had Mom, you have me. We're here because you survived, because you were strong enough to keep going. Sometimes surviving doesn't feel like strength, Magda said. Sometimes it just feels like stubbornness or cowardice. I could have fought. And you'd be dead, Victor said bluntly. You did what you had to do to live. There's no shame in that, Magda. No guilt required. The people who should carry guilt are the ones who came in the night with guns and matches, not the ones who ran. It was the same argument he'd been making with himself for 30 years, Sophia realized. Absolving Magda absolved himself, or at least tried to. But guilt, she was learning, didn't operate on logic. It was a weight that pressed down regardless of whether you deserved it, and the only way to bear it was to find meaning in the survival, to build something that justified continuing. That evening, after they'd settled Magda back in her room and she'd drifted off to sleep, Victor and Sophia sat in the facility's small cafeteria drinking terrible coffee from paper cups. It was such a normal moment, such an ordinary human thing to do that it felt almost jarring given the intensity of the past week. Thank you, Victor said suddenly, for trusting me, for not running when you learned about Kozlov, for staying. I didn't have much choice, Sophia said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. You had every choice, Victor corrected. You could have taken my offer to disappear. Most people would have. But you stayed, and that means something. It means family means something to you beyond just blood or obligation. Sophia considered this. I stayed because my grandmother deserves to spend her final months happy, and you make her happy. You give her something I can't, a connection to who she was before America, before the running and the fear. That's worth the risk. And what about you? Victor asked. Am I worth the risk to you? Not as your grandmother's cousin, but as someone in your own life? It was a surprisingly vulnerable question from a man who'd built fortifications around himself. Sophia thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she admitted. You're complicated. Your world is complicated. Sometimes you scare me, if I'm being honest. At the way you operate, the calculations you make about people's lives, it's so foreign to how I was raised. But Victor prompted, sensing there was more. But I also see how much you care, how deeply you feel things even though you try to hide it. And I see how you've honored your commitment to my grandmother, how you show up every week, how you listen to her stories like they're precious. That matters. That's real. She paused. I guess what I'm saying is I'm willing to keep learning who you are. The whole of you, not just the parts that are comfortable or easy. Victor's eyes were bright with emotion he couldn't quite hide. That's more than I deserve. More than I expected. Probably, Sophia agreed with a small smile. But family isn't about deserving things. It's about showing up anyway. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Two people bound by blood and circumstance, slowly building something that might eventually be called trust. The cafeteria around them was empty except for a janitor mopping floors in the corner, and the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song. It was unglamorous and real, so different from the polished world of Kovacs developments, and maybe that's what made the moment matter. I've been thinking, Victor said after a while, about what happens after Magda. He couldn't bring himself to say dies. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you, and I'm not going to be around forever either. I want to make sure you're taken care of, that you have the resources to build the life, the restaurant you talked about, your dreams. Victor, Sophia started, uncomfortable with where this was going. I'm not offering charity, he interrupted. I'm talking about family legacy. I have no children, no heir. You're the only family I have in the world besides Magda. And when the time comes, I want everything I've built to mean something beyond just accumulation of wealth and power. I wanted to give you the foundation I never had, the choices I couldn't make. Sophia felt the weight of what he was offering and what he was asking. He wanted to matter beyond his own life. He wanted his empire, built on trauma and determination, to become something generative rather than just protective. He was asking her to be his legacy. I can't think about that right now, she said honestly. My grandmother's dying. That's all I can handle. Can we table this conversation for another time? Victor nodded, accepting the boundary. Of course. I just wanted you to know when you're ready to think about the future. I've thought about it too. You're not alone, Sophia. Not anymore. It was both a promise and a burden, and Sophia carried it with her as they left the facility that night. Walking out into the cool spring air where Andre waited by the car, ever vigilant, ever ready, she thought about futures built on painful pasts, about legacies forged from survival, and about the strange paths that led a waitress and a mafia boss to become family. Spring turned to summer, and Magda's lucid days became increasingly rare. The dementia that had been sporadic now became the dominant reality, with only brief windows of clarity breaking through the fog. Sophia rearranged her schedule at Kovacs Developments to spend every morning with her grandmother, and Victor never questioned it. He often joined her, sitting quietly in Magda's room, holding her hand while she slept, or muttered in Hungarian about people and places that existed only in her fragmenting memory. The doctors said it could be weeks or months, but the trajectory was clear. Magda was fading, retreating into a past that was more vivid to her than the present. Sometimes she thought Sophia was her daughter. Sometimes she thought Victor was his own father. Sometimes she was 19 again, newly arrived in America, terrified and alone. The woman who had survived so much was slowly dissolving, and there was nothing anyone could do but bear witness. On a humid Tuesday in late June, Sophia arrived at Riverside Care to find her grandmother agitated, struggling against the aide who was trying to help her eat breakfast. Magda was speaking rapid Hungarian, her voice high and panicked, her eyes wide with fear. Sophia rushed to her side, taking over from the overwhelmed aide. Naja mama, it's okay. It's Sophia. You're safe, she said in Hungarian, using the language as an anchor. But Magda wasn't seeing her. She was somewhere else, someone else. They're coming, Magda said urgently, gripping Sophia's arms with surprising strength. I can hear the trucks. We have to hide the children. Where's Victor? Where's the boy? They'll take him. They'll take all of us. Sophia's heart broke. Her grandmother was back in Felsbania, reliving the night that had destroyed her family. Victor is safe, Sophia said gently. The children are safe. You're in America. You're far away from there. But Magda wasn't listening. She was lost in the nightmare, tears streaming down her face. I can smell the smoke. The house is burning. Mama, Papa, where are my sisters? I can't find them in the smoke. Her voice rose to a wail, raw and primal. Sophia called Victor immediately, her own voice shaking. He arrived within 20 minutes, Andre breaking every traffic law to get them there. When Victor entered the room, Magda was still trapped in her terror, still calling out for her family. He knelt beside the wheelchair, taking her face in his hands. Magda, it's Victor. I'm here. I'm safe. Look at me, he said in Hungarian, his voice gentle but firm. Something in his tone, or perhaps the familiarity of his voice, cut through the fog. Magda focused on him, her breathing ragged. Victor? Little Victor? She whispered, her confusion evident. But you're so old. What happened to you? I grew up, he said simply. We both did. We survived, Magda. We're here. We're alive. The past can't hurt us anymore. But they're all gone, she said, fresh tears flowing. Esther and Mira and Catalin, Mama and Papa, all gone. And it's because of you, your resistance, your noble fight. They burned because of you. The accusation hung in the air, brutal and honest. It was what Magda had kept buried for 60 years, the rage and blame beneath the forgiveness she'd offered. In her confusion, the filters were gone, and the raw truth emerged. Sophia saw Victor flinch as if physically struck, saw the guilt that lived in him rise to the surface. I know, he said, his voice thick. I know it's my fault. I've known it every day for 30 years. And I'm sorry, Magda. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to save them. I'm sorry I lived when they did. I'm sorry for everything I cost you. Magda stared at him, her lucidity flickering like a candle in the wind. I wanted to hate you, she said. When I found out you were alive, part of me wanted to hate you for surviving, but you're the last piece of them, Victor. You're the last piece of my family, and I can't lose you too. Not again. She pulled him close and he buried his face in her shoulder, this powerful, dangerous man reduced to the terrified boy he'd once been. Sophia watched through her own tears as 60 years of grief and guilt and love played out in that embrace. This was what trauma looked like when it finally found voice. This was what survival cost. When Magda finally calmed, exhausted by the emotional storm, the nurse gave her a sedative to help her rest. Victor sat beside her bed, holding her hand, refusing to leave. Sophia sat on the other side, and together they kept vigil. Hours passed. Magda slept, her breathing shallow but steady. The summer afternoon light slanted through the window, golden and warm, completely indifferent to the human drama unfolding in its glow. She's right, you know, Victor said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. It is my fault. Everything that happened, it's because I believed I could make a difference. Because I thought my ideals mattered more than the safety of the people who loved me. You were 17, Sophia said. You were a kid who believed in something. You can't carry the blame for what monsters did, but I do carry it, Victor said. Every building I've built, every dollar I've made, every person I've crushed to maintain my power, it's all been weighted with that guilt. I thought if I could be powerful enough, successful enough, untouchable enough, maybe it would balance the scales. Maybe it would justify surviving, but it doesn't. It never will. Sophia looked at this man who'd let her into his life, who'd shown her both his strength and his wounds, and she understood something fundamental. Maybe it's not about justifying survival, she said. Maybe it's about honoring it. You can't bring them back. You can't undo what happened, but you can make sure their memory matters. That the life you built means something beyond just accumulation and protection. Is that what you think I've done? Victor asked, genuinely uncertain. Built something meaningful? You found your way back to family, Sophia said. After 30 years of believing you were alone, you found us. You gave my grandmother peace in her final months. You gave her the chance to see you, to forgive you, to not die alone with her ghosts. That matters, Victor. That's meaningful. He was quiet for a long time processing this. When she's gone, he finally said, you'll be the only family I have left. The only person in the world who knows the full story, who understands where I came from and what I've done. That's a heavy burden to carry. Then maybe you should think about making it lighter, Sophia suggested. You've spent 30 years building walls and accumulating power. Maybe it's time to build something else. Something that connects instead of isolates. Like what? Victor asked, genuinely curious. I don't know yet, Sophia admitted, but we'll figure it out together. That's what family does, right? They figure things out together. The simplicity of the statement seemed to move him. He squeezed Magda's hand gently, then reached across the bed to squeeze Sophia's as well, connecting the three of them in a chain. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me worth knowing. Thank you for finding us, Sophia replied, for being brave enough to face your past even when it terrified you. They sat like that as the afternoon faded into evening, 3 generations bound by blood and trauma, and the stubborn determination to survive. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Millions of people living millions of lives, each carrying their own histories and hopes. But in room 237 of Riverside Care, time had slowed to the rhythm of Magda's breathing, and nothing existed except the fierce love between the last survivors of a family that had been scattered to ash and reformed in unexpected ways. 2 days later, Magda had another lucid period. It came in the early morning when Sophia arrived to find her grandmother awake and clear-eyed, sitting up in bed with the alertness that had been increasingly absent. It was like a gift, these final moments of clarity, and Sophia knew to treasure them. Edison, Magda said, her voice weak but present. Where's Victor? I need to speak with both of you. Sophia called him immediately, and he arrived within the hour. When they were both seated beside her bed, Magda took a hand from each of them, her grip surprisingly firm. I don't have much time, she said, and it wasn't about that morning, but about the larger arc of her life. I can feel myself leaving, bit by bit. Soon I'll be gone completely, lost in the fog. But right now, I'm here. And I need to say this while I still can. Naja Mama, don't, Sophia started, but Magda shook her head. Let me speak. I've been silent too long about too many things. She looked at Victor first. You asked for my forgiveness, and I gave it. But what I didn't tell you is that forgiveness isn't the same as absolution. You carry guilt for what happened, as you should. Guilt is how we remember that our actions have consequences. But it shouldn't be a cage, Victor. It should be a compass. Let it guide you to do better, to be better. but don't let it trap you in the past. Victor nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. Magda turned to Sophia. And you, my darling girl, you've worked so hard to take care of me, to carry the weight of this family, but you need to know that's not your job. Your job is to live, to build your own life, your own dreams. I'm proud of you beyond measure, but I don't want my death to become another weight you carry. When I'm gone, I want you to be free. I don't want you to go, Sophia whispered, tears flowing freely. I know, but I'm ready. I've lived longer than I ever expected, and I got to see you grown and strong and surrounded by family. And if that family's complicated, she smiled at Victor. I got to make peace with my ghosts. Not everyone gets that gift. She brought their hands together, placing Sophia's hand in Victor's. You two, you're all that's left of the Dalka bloodline. You're the future. I want you to promise me something. Promise me you'll take care of each other. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. Promise me you'll build something good from all this pain. Something that would make Esther and Mira and Catalan proud. We promise, they said in unison, and Magda smiled, satisfied. Good, then I can rest. Magda Dalka died on a Thursday morning in early July, slipping away in her sleep while sunlight streamed through the window of her room. Sophia had been there, dozing in the chair beside the bed after spending another night keeping vigil. She woke to silence, the absence of her grandmother's breathing louder than any alarm. For a moment she simply sat there, holding Magda's still warm hand, unable to process that the woman who'd been her anchor, her history, her connection to a past she'd never known, was gone. The call to Victor was wordless. She simply dialed his number, and when he answered, she couldn't speak through the tears. He understood immediately. I'm coming, was all he said, and the line went dead. He arrived before the nurses had even finished their protocols, Andre waiting respectfully in the hallway while Victor entered the room where Sophia sat frozen beside her grandmother's body. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He simply sat beside her and placed his hand over hers where it still clutched Magda's. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people bound by love for a woman who'd survived impossible things, only to finally succumb to the gentle thief of time. When Sophia finally spoke, her voice was raw. I knew it was coming. The doctors prepared me. She prepared me. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. She looked at Victor, her eyes red and swollen. She was the last connection to my mother. The last person who remembered me as a child. And now she's gone, and I feel like I'm floating untethered. You're not untethered, Victor said quietly. You're still connected to her memory, her strength, her love. Death doesn't sever those bonds, Sophia. It just changes how we carry them. He paused, his own grief evident in the lines around his eyes. And you're connected to me. For better or worse, we're family now. You're not alone in this. The funeral was small, held at a modest chapel that Magda had occasionally attended. Sophia had found a Hungarian priest to conduct the service, wanting her grandmother to be sent off in the language of her birth. Victor arranged everything else, quietly handling the logistics and the cost, ensuring that Magda's final journey was dignified and beautiful. The casket was simple but elegant, covered in white roses and lilies. A photograph of young Magda, the girl from Felsbania with hope in her eyes, sat on an easel beside it. There were only a handful of attendees. Sophia's roommates came, showing support in their simple presence. A few of Magda's neighbors from the years before she'd entered care, the staff from Riverside who'd grown fond of her, and Victor's people, Andre standing at the back like a sentinel, Elena and Marcus from the company paying respects to their boss's family, and surprisingly, a few others Sophia didn't recognize. Men and women of various ages who introduced themselves as members of the Hungarian community, people who'd heard through their networks that one of their own was being laid to rest. The priest spoke of Magda's journey, of a woman who'd fled persecution and built a life from nothing, who'd raised a daughter alone, who'd embodied the resilience of all who'd survived the darkest chapters of European history. Victor gave a eulogy in Hungarian that made several of the elderly attendees weep. He spoke of family, of loss, of the courage it took to keep living when everything you loved had been taken. He spoke of Magda's final gift, forgiveness and the restoration of family bonds that should never have been broken. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she stood before the small gathering and felt the weight of generations pressing down on her. My grandmother taught me that survival isn't just about living, she began, her voice steady despite the tears. It's about choosing to build something from the ruins. She survived things I can't even imagine, and instead of letting that pain define her, she used it to create something beautiful. She gave me life, yes, but more than that, she gave me an example of what it means to be strong, to be kind despite cruelty, to love despite loss. She glanced at Victor, who stood with his hands clasped, his head bowed, and even at the end, she was still teaching me. She taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing connection, even when it's complicated. It's about forgiveness, even when forgiveness feels impossible. Her voice broke slightly. I hope I can live up to her example. I hope I can build something that honors her memory. The burial was in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city. a peaceful place with old trees and worn headstones. Magda was laid to rest beside her husband Larry, reunited with the man who'd offered her safety when safety seemed impossible. The priest said the final prayers, and Sophia dropped a handful of Hungarian soil, which Victor had somehow procured, onto the casket, a piece of her homeland to rest with her bones. As the small gathering dispersed, Victor and Sophia remained at the graveside. The summer afternoon was hot and still, cicadas singing their monotonous song in the trees. It felt wrong that the world continued so normally when Sophia's had just fundamentally shifted. "What happens now?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "How do I just go back to normal life?" "You don't," Victor said simply. "You build a new normal, one that incorporates her absence but honors her presence in your life." He turned to face her fully. "And you have time to figure out what that looks like. Take whatever time you need. The job will be there when you're ready. Or it won't if you decide you want something different. No pressure, no expectations." Sophia appreciated the space he was offering, but she also knew that sitting still with grief would consume her. "Actually," she said slowly, an idea forming, "I think I need to work. I need to do something productive. But maybe not just the job I've been doing." "What are you thinking?" Victor asked, curious. "You said you wanted to build something meaningful, something that honored their memory," Sophia said, gesturing to the grave. "What if we actually did that? Not just donations to charities, something real, something that would have mattered to them." Victor's expression sharpened with interest. "Go on." "A foundation," Sophia said, the idea taking shape as she spoke. "Something that helps refugees, immigrants, people who've lost everything and are trying to rebuild. Skills training, small business loans, housing assistance, all the things my grandmother needed when she came to America but had to fight for. We could make it easier for others." "The Dalka Foundation," Victor said, testing the name. A slow smile spread across his face. "I like it, but not just money. Real support, mentorship, community building, creating the safety net that should have existed for people like Magda." "Exactly," Sophia said, feeling a spark of purpose cutting through the grief. "And we could prioritize people from Eastern Europe, from places that were devastated by Soviet oppression. Make it a legacy that actually means something." Victor nodded, his mind already working through logistics. "I'll have my lawyers draw up the paperwork. We'll need to establish a board, create a mission statement, set up the funding structure." "And this is actually brilliant, Sophia. It's exactly what Magda would have wanted." For the first time since her grandmother's death, Sophia felt like she could breathe. Purpose was oxygen. Having something to build towards, something that would transform grief into action, made the unbearable slightly more bearable. "She made us promise to build something good," Sophia said. "This is how we keep that promise." They stood together at the grave, the last two survivors of a family that had been scattered and reformed, and made silent vows to the woman who'd held them together. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery. In the distance, new mourners were arriving for another funeral, the endless cycle of life and death continuing its rotation. "There's something else I want to do," Sophia said as they began walking back toward the car where Andre waited. "I want to go to Hungary, to Felsbanya, or what's left of it. I want to see where she came from, where you came from. I want to understand the beginning of the story, not just the end." Victor stopped walking, surprise evident on his face. "I haven't been back since I escaped. I've spent 30 years avoiding that place." "I know," Sophia said, "but maybe it's time for both of us. We can go together, face the ghosts together." She met his eyes. "Or we can let the past stay buried and move forward. Either way, it's your choice. I just think there might be meddling in seeing it again." In acknowledging what happened there without running from it, Victor was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia could see the internal struggle playing across his face. Fear and longing, the desire to return and the terror of what returning would mean. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, we'll go. After we get the foundation established, after things settle, we'll go to Felsbanya together. We'll see what remains, and we'll honor them properly," Sophia added. "Not just Magda, but all of them. Esther, Mira, Catalin, your parents. Everyone who should have had full lives but didn't get the chance. A memorial," Victor said, understanding. "Something permanent. Something that says their lives mattered, even if the world tried to erase them." They reached the car, and Andre opened the door silently. Before getting in, Sophia turned back to look at the grave one last time. A simple headstone marked the spot. Magda's name and dates carved into gray granite. "Beloved mother and grandmother. Survivor." The words felt inadequate for capturing the fullness of her life, but maybe that was the point. Lives were too big to be contained by stones and dates. They lived on in the people who remembered them, and the choices those people made, and the legacies they built from love and loss. "Goodbye, Naji Mama," Sophia whispered. "Thank you for everything. I'll make you proud." As they drove away from the cemetery back toward the city and the future that awaited them, Sophia felt the weight of her grandmother's death settling into her bones. But alongside the grief was something else: determination. She would honor Magda's memory not just by mourning but by building, by creating something that would help others survive and thrive the way her grandmother had, by transforming pain into purpose. Victor seemed to sense her resolve. "She would be proud of you already," he said quietly, "of who you've become, of how you've handled all of this." "I hope so," Sophia said. "I really hope so." The car merged into traffic, carrying them back to lives that would never be quite the same but could, perhaps, be shaped into something meaningful. Something that honored the dead while serving the living. Something that proved survival wasn't just about enduring, but about building bridges from past to future, from pain to purpose, from loss to legacy. 6 months after Magda's death, Sophia stood in the lobby of a renovated brownstone in Queens, watching as the first clients of the Dalka Foundation arrived for their orientation. The building had been one of Victor's properties, sitting vacant for years, and he donated it without hesitation. They'd spent months transforming it into a welcoming space. Classrooms for language lessons and job training, offices for caseworkers and immigration attorneys, a community room where people could gather and connect, and a small library stocked with books in a dozen languages. The foundation had officially launched in September, and the response had been overwhelming. Within weeks, they'd helped 30 families navigate the immigration system, provided housing assistance to 15 more, and established partnerships with local businesses willing to hire refugees with limited English skills. Sophia had left her position as Victor's assistant to run the foundation full-time, and she'd never felt more purposeful in her life. Victor arrived as the orientation session beginning, slipping in quietly to observe from the back. He did this often, showing up unannounced to see the foundation's work firsthand. Sophia saw him and smiled, noting the softness in his expression as he watched a Syrian family receiving welcome packets and information about ESL classes. This was what transformation looked like, a man who'd built an empire on power and control learning to build something on compassion and service. After the session ended and the families had dispersed to various appointments and classes, Victor approached Sophia in her office, a converted bedroom on the second floor with windows overlooking the street. The walls were covered with photos, Magda and her sisters in Felsbania. Victor is a young man, the foundation's first graduates, families thriving in their new homes, a memorial to what was lost and what was being rebuilt. 32 families this month, Victor said, reviewing the statistics on Sophia's desk. That's almost double what we projected. Word is spreading, Sophia said with pride. People are telling others that there's a place that actually helps. That doesn't just process paperwork, but treats them like humans. That matters to people who've been treated like problems to be solved. Magda would be proud, Victor said, and it wasn't the first time he'd said it. It had become their touchstone, their way of measuring whether their choices honored her memory. She would, Sophia agreed. But I think she'd also tell us we're not done yet. Pulled out a folder she'd been keeping on her desk for weeks. I've been researching Felsbania. It still exists, though it's tiny now. Most of the original families left after the war. But the village is there, the church is there, and I think it's time we went. They'd been planning this journey since the funeral, but life and the foundation launch had delayed it. Now with winter approaching, it felt urgent, like a final piece of closure that couldn't wait any longer. Victor took the folder, flipping through the information Sophia had gathered. Maps, historical records, photographs of the village as it existed now. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly, I'm afraid of what I'll feel when I see it again. Afraid the guilt will be too much to bear. I know, Sophia said, but you won't be alone. We'll face it together, and maybe facing it is the only way to finally let it go. 3 weeks later, they stood in a rental car on a narrow dirt road in northeastern Hungary, looking at what remained of Felsbania. The village was smaller than Sophia had imagined, just a cluster of houses, a general store, and the church with its crooked steeple that Magda had described so many times. Many of the buildings were abandoned, slowly returning to the earth, but people still lived here, mostly elderly, the last generation with memory of what the village had once been. Victor was silent, staring at the landscape with an expression of overwhelming emotion. His hands gripped the car door so tightly his knuckles were white. Sophia placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent anchor, and he took a shaky breath. That was our house, he said, pointing to a foundation where a structure had once stood. Only stones remained, overgrown with weeds and small trees. That's where they died, where everything ended. They walked to the site slowly, reverently. Sophia knelt and placed her hand on the cold stones, feeling the weight of history beneath her fingers. This ground was soaked in tragedy, but it was also the birthplace of survivors. Magda had walked these same stones. Victor's parents and aunts had lived and loved here. It was sacred ground in its way. Tell me about them, Sophia said. Not the way they died, but how they lived. What were they like before fear and politics destroyed everything? Victor sat on a fallen stone and closed his eyes, reaching back across decades. My father was a carpenter. He made furniture that people kept for generations. Beautiful, simple pieces. My mother sang while she cooked. She had this laugh that made everyone around her smile. His voice grew stronger, warmer. Esther was the practical one, always solving problems. Mira was all emotion and art. Catalin was fierce, never backing down from a fight. And Magda, she was curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to know why and how. They sound wonderful, Sophia said softly. They were, Victor agreed. They deserved long lives, deserved to see their children grow up, to grow old themselves. They deserve better than what this world gave them. They spent the afternoon in the village, speaking with the few remaining elderly residents who remembered the Dalka family. One woman, ancient and frail, had been a childhood friend of Mira's. She wept when Victor introduced himself, touching his face with trembling hands as if confirming he was real. Another man, the son of the village priest, remembered the fire, remembered the fear that had gripped everyone after. He'd been 10 years old, hiding in his bedroom while soldiers patrolled the streets. At the church, they met with the current priest, a young man from Budapest who served 3 villages in rotation. He opened the church records for them, showing them the baptism entries for Victor and his sister, the marriage records of their parents, generations of dulkas recorded in fading ink. It was proof of existence, of lives lived, of a family that had mattered. I'd like to commission a memorial, Victor told the priest. A plaque to be placed in the church, listing the names of all those who died in the Soviet purges. Not just my family, but everyone from this village. Their names should be remembered. The priest agreed enthusiastically, and they spent time compiling names, recording histories that would otherwise be lost. It was holy work, this remembering, this insistence that the erased be made visible again. That evening, they stood at the foundation of the burned house as the sun set over the Carpathian foothill. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. Victor pulled a small flask from his pocket, Hungarian palinka that he'd brought specifically for this moment. In Hungarian tradition, he explained, you pour a drink for the dead. Let them taste the world they left behind. He poured the clear liquid onto the stones, speaking in Hungarian. For Istvan and Rosa, who raised me with love. For Esther, Mira, and Catalin, who taught me what family means. For all who died here, may you rest in peace. May you be remembered. May your suffering not have been in vain. Sophia added her own prayer, simpler but no less heartfelt. For Magda, who survived and built a life from ruins. For the strength she gave me. For the family she kept alive through memory. Thank you. I'll carry you forward. They stood in silence as darkness fell. Two people connected by blood and trauma and choice, honoring the dead while claiming the future. It wasn't closure exactly. Wounds this deep never fully closed, but it was acknowledgement, it was witnessing. It was refusing to let history erase what had been. On the flight back to New York, Sophia and Victor barely spoke, both processing the emotional weight of their journey. But as they drove from the airport back into the city, Victor broke the silence. I'm thinking of stepping back from the company, he said. Not retiring completely, but delegating more, focusing on the foundation instead. We could expand, open branches in other cities, really build something that outlasts us. Sophia looked at him with surprise and approval. Magda would definitely be proud of that. I'm 60 years old, Victor continued. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire that ultimately doesn't mean much. But the foundation, what we're doing there, that matters. That changes lives. I want to spend whatever time I have left doing work that honors the people I lost rather than just insulating myself from loss. I think that's exactly right, Sophia said, and I'll be there with you, building it together. Victor smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes. You know, when I walked into that diner and heard you speaking Hungarian, I thought my past had come back to destroy me. Instead, it gave me a future I never thought I'd have. It gave me family again. It gave me purpose beyond survival. Funny how that works, Sophia said. I thought I was just answering my grandmother's call. Instead, I found a family history, a cousin I never knew existed, and a mission that gives my life meaning. Some moments change everything, Victor said, echoing the opening truth of their story. That was ours. They drove through the city streets, past the restaurant where it all began, past the foundation building where tomorrow they'd continue their work, toward futures that honored the past while refusing to be defined by it. Magda's memory lived in every refugee they helped, every family they reunited, every person they gave hope to. Victor's guilt had transformed into purpose. Sophia's grief had become dedication. The Dalka family had been scattered by violence and reformed by chance. They'd been broken and rebuilt, haunted and healed. And now, they were choosing to build something that would outlast them both. A legacy of compassion born from tragedy. A foundation of hope built on the ruins of loss, and a promise kept to a woman who'd survived the unthinkable and taught them that survival was just the beginning. What mattered was what you built after. As they pulled up to Sophia's apartment, Victor turned to her one last time. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing who I could, not just who I was, for giving me the chance to become someone my family would be proud of. Thank you for finding us, Sophia replied, for being brave enough to face your past so we could all have a future. They parted with the understanding that tomorrow they'd continue the work, that the foundation was just beginning, that their story was still being written, but tonight they could rest in the knowledge that they'd honored the dead, served the living, and transformed a chance encounter in a restaurant into a legacy that would ripple forward through generations. Sometimes a single sentence changes everything. Sometimes answering a phone call in your grandmother's language opens a door you never knew existed. And sometimes the families we build from the ashes of tragedy are stronger than the ones we lost. This was their truth. This was their story. And it was just beginning.